Figures, 15,378 people in Glasgow Central receive meantime. Many of those will be working in low-paid jobs. Tell us what representations this has made to his colleague, the Secretary of State for the DWP, to support the uprating of benefits, because he hasn't been clear about what representations he has made.
Again, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question, and she makes exposed myself for a very short time and not quite got there yet, but that these discussions are indeed happening. I would also say fiscal framework. The Scottish Government, as she referred to in the levers they have, will receive an estimated £340 million of additional funding in 23-24 as a result of the basic rate tax cut on its own. And it is for the Scottish Government to use that additional funding, as they want to, including on increased spending.
5 years. Given the cost of living crisis, did he...
On the corporation tax, I think he's probably aware that this government has committed to reversing on the planned increase from 19%, and so it's staying at 19%, which will, typical households receiving mean-tested benefits will receive £1,200 support. Those on disability benefits on top of that will receive £1,350. Low-income pensioner households will receive £1,500 support, and low-income pensioner households will receive £1,000 support on top of the household will pay.
Shadow Secretary Peter Carr.
My honourable friend, the Shadow Secretary of State for Scotland, has a long-standing family commitment, which is why the privilege of asking questions today falls to me. The UK government so-called mini-budget has created a financial crisis, made in Downing Street but paid for by working. So can I ask the Minister, has his department made an assessment as to
in place of the Shadow Secretary of State? As I've already said, the energy support that's been put in place pay more than £2,500, and that's on top of the additional benefits that's already been announced earlier this year and more recently that will make sure households, many households actually, those on the lowest incomes, will actually be better off than they would have been previously.
The own and energy crisis. Does he agree with me that the right way forward is through Labour's plan for Great British Energy, a homegrown, publicly owned company run for and by the people of this country and for the interests of people in this country?
Well, the honourable member is absolutely correct to point out the Scottish Government's commitment back in 2017 to have by now created a nationalised energy company in Scotland, and that's not something that's happened, and quite frankly I don't think it should, and neither do I think Labour's plans should be implemented either.
SNP Murray Black.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The first mini-budget by this government required 2 Bank of England interventions just to stabilise the economy. It tanked the pound and it massively worsened the already brutal cost of living crisis our constituents are facing. So will the Minister confirm that as Scotland's representative in Cabinet, any future fiscal event by this government will neither make further cuts to the Scottish budget or introduce further cuts to our already crippled public services?
Well, on top of the already record increased block grant to £41 billion that the Scottish Government has already received, measures announced in the fiscal statement by the Chancellor for the Scottish Government to decide whether to spend that on tax cuts or increase spending.
Murray Black.
Mr. Speaker, dodgy COVID contracts to their pals. They're scrapping the bankers' bonus for will. They're now helping the richest people in the country on the backs of millions of people choosing between heating and eating. So can I ask the Minister, is it genuinely a surprise to him and his colleagues to discover why most people in Scotland do detest the Tory party and their values?
Well, I must say, Mr. Speaker, I'm disappointed that the honourable member chooses to double down on the hate-filled language of her party leader. But I would repeat again, the Scottish Government has received a record amount of block grant funding since devolution began, of £41 billion, and all the other measures that people in Scotland, people and businesses across Scotland, will benefit from, particularly those in the most vulnerable households and on the lowest incomes, will benefit from the measures this government has taken.
At Western.
Right, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government's recently announced energy price guarantee will support households with their energy bills across the whole United Kingdom, including in Scotland. This decisive action will save the typical household at least £1,000 a year for the next 2 years.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just following up on the question made by my right honourable friend earlier about the Scottish Government's decision to abandon its plans. Can he just confirm what discussions the Minister's had with his Scottish counterparts about ensuring Scotland's renewable potential directly benefits both the people of Scotland and the people of the United Kingdom, given that the cost of renewable energy to the consumer is so much lower?
As I've said earlier, Mr. Speaker, ministers in the Scotland office discuss such matters regularly with our colleagues in other government departments. Energy policy, as I'm sure the honourable member will understand, is a reserved policy, but we do endeavour to work constructively with the Scottish Government on everything that can have an impact on the livelihoods of people and communities in Scotland, as well as those of businesses.
Minister Liz Truss.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the most critical ways of reducing domestic energy costs in Scotland is by supporting renewable energy generation and carbon reduction efforts. And as I've raised at this dispatch box before, the UK Government chose to sideline the Acorn carbon capture and storage project in the north east of Scotland, and the Scottish Government has refused to provide financing either. The Secretary of State may be interested to hear that Labour has put forward a fully costed plan to invest in Britain's infrastructure, and that includes providing the funding for the Acorn project. So will the Secretary of State encourage his Cabinet colleague
Start the question again, because I couldn't hear.
Well, I believe the Secretary of State and the Minister may have heard the first part of the question. So what I will do is conclude by saying, asking the Secretary of State to encourage his Cabinet colleagues to look again at how the carbon capture and storage project can be supported to get underway as a matter of urgency.
Well, as the Honourable Lady may be aware, the Acorn cluster looms large in my own constituency, so I have nothing but the greatest support for that project. I can also assure the Honourable Lady and the rest of the House that this Government has also stood firm behind that particular project, having invested £41 million in that project directly, as well as the project itself being the reserve cluster in the Track 1 sequence. Track 2 sequencing for carbon capture and storage across the United Kingdom is coming soon, I'm told, and I look forward to that announcement with great interest.
Right, so that completes Scottish questions. Before we call the Prime Minister, I would like to point out the British Sign Language interpretation proceedings is available to watch on Parliament Live TV. We now start with questions to the Prime Minister. Graham Stringer.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, this Saturday marks the first anniversary of the senseless murder of our friend Sir David Amess. David was a superb parliamentarian who brought colleagues across this House together on a huge range of issues. He represented the best of Parliament as a devoted champion of his constituency. Our thoughts are with his wife Julia and his 5 children, as well as the people of Southend, which now stands tall as a city in testament to David's tireless work. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Graham Stringer.
I knew Sir David, and I share the Prime Minister's sentiments completely. Spooking the markets and increasing the cost of borrowing, increasing the cost of mortgages was almost certainly an act of gross incompetence rather than malevolence. But going back on the commitment to end no-fault evictions is an act of extreme callousness. Yes. Can the Prime Minister reassure the 11 million private renters in this country that she will carry out the commitment to get rid of no-fault evictions?
I can.
Julian Sturdy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On a recent visit to the children's ward at York Hospital, I was shocked to learn that paediatric waiting time targets are the same as that of adult patients. So, as we know, any delay to treatment for young patients can have a damaging effect on development and their future prospects. So, can I ask the Prime Minister to look at this as a matter of urgency?
Well, I'm very, very sorry to hear about the situation for young people at York Hospital, and I'm pleased to say that this is an issue that my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, is focused on in her plan for patients. We are making sure that people can access treatment as soon as possible. We're delivering record staffing numbers and putting in place record levels of funding.
Comes the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join with the Prime Minister in her comments about Sir David? She spoke for the whole House when she made those comments, and I know how deeply his loss was felt on the opposite benches, and we extend our best wishes across at this important time. Mr. Speaker, I also want to send my heartfelt condolences to the families of all those who tragically lost their lives in Chrysler last week. Donegal is a special place to me and my family and across this House. The people there are in all of our thoughts. Mr. Speaker, this morning, the Business Secretary toured the TV studios arguing that the turmoil in the markets has nothing to do with her budget. Does the Prime Minister agree with him?
Well, Mr. Speaker, what we have done is we have taken decisive action. We have taken decisive action to make sure that people are not facing energy bills of £6,000 for 2 years. And I think we remember the opposition is only talking about 6 months. We've also taken decisive action to make sure that we are not facing the highest taxes for 70 years in the face of a global economic slowdown. And what we're making sure is that we protect our economy at this very difficult time internationally. And as a result of our action, Mr. Speaker, and this has been independently corroborated, we will see higher growth and lower inflation.
Mr. Speaker, avoiding the question, ducking responsibility, lost in denial. No wonder investors have no confidence in her government. And this is why it matters. A few weeks ago, Zach and Rebecca from Wolverhampton were all set to buy their first home. Then the government's borrowing spree sent interest rates spiralling and their mortgage offer was withdrawn. I met them last week. They're back to square one, unable to buy, devastated, sick to the back teeth with excuses and blame shifting. Does the Prime Minister understand why Zach and Rebecca are completely furious with her?
Mr. Speaker, the fact is that when I came into office, people were facing energy bills of up to £6,000 a year. Well, I'm sorry. Mr. Speaker, the party opposite are shouting that he is opposing the very package that we brought in energy price guarantee. That was the major part of the mini-budget that we announced. And, Mr. Speaker, he has refused to confirm whether or not he backs our energy price guarantee for 2 years, which protects families not just this winter, but next winter. What we're seeing, Mr. Speaker, is we are seeing interest rates rising globally. They are rising globally in the face of Putin's appalling war in Ukraine. And what we are doing is helping people with lower stamp duty, helping people with their energy costs, reducing inflation with our energy package, and keeping taxes low. And I notice that the honourable gentleman had a Damascus conversion last night when he backed our cut to national insurance.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the economy is in turmoil. People are really worried. This is really not the time to descend into absolutely nonsense attacks about last night. There's no point. There's no point. There's no point trying to hide it. Everyone can see what has happened. The Tories went on a borrowing spree, sending mortgage rates through the roof. They are skyrocketing by £500 a month. And for nearly 2 million homeowners, their fixed-rate deals are coming to an end next year. They're worried sick, and everybody in this House knows it. They won't forgive. They won't forget, and nor should they. When will she stop ducking responsibility, do the right thing, and reverse her kamikaze budget, which is causing so much pain?
Mr. Speaker, last night the Labour Party supported bringing down national insurance. And is he really?
I won't see the Prime Minister. I'm sorry if the own party doesn't, but I certainly do.
Mr. Speaker, I'm genuinely unclear about what Labour's...
I think we don't want an early bath at this stage. Rugby World Cup's coming. Don't start it too soon. Just let's hear the questions and certainly the answers, Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm genuinely unclear as to what the Labour Party's policy is on our energy price guarantee. It was the biggest part. It was the biggest part of our mini-budget. Are the opposition saying they want to reverse it and they want to see people facing energy bills of £6,000? Is that what he's saying?
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister knows very well that on this side we voted against the national insurance in the first place. She voted for it. So who's doing the U-turn? Honestly. Last week, the Prime Minister was forced to U-turn on her unfunded tax cut for the super wealthy. This week, she's beginning to realise that she needs to extend the windfall tax, one step behind the CEO of Shell. But she's still going ahead with £18 billion of tax cuts for the richest businesses, and they didn't even ask for it. She's still gift-wrapped a stamp duty cut for landlords, just as renters feel the pinch. And she's still holding out tax cuts for those who live off stocks and shares. Why does she expect working people to pick up the bill for her unfunded tax cuts for those at the top?
I notice that the Leader of the Opposition is still not saying whether or not he supports our energy price guarantee. This is very relevant, Mr. Speaker, because it is the biggest part. It is the biggest part of our mini-budget. It's the biggest part of the mini-budget. The fact is that all the opposition have said is that people should be supported for 6 months. Does he think that in March pensioners should be facing very high energy bills? Because that's what will happen if he doesn't support our energy price guarantee.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, not even attempting to answer the questions now. I gently remind her that the idea of freezing energy bills was a Labour idea, which she then took on. During her leadership contest, the Prime Minister said, and I quote her exactly, "I'm very clear. I'm not planning public spending reductions." Is she going to stick to that?
Prime Minister.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Mr. Speaker, we are spending almost £1 trillion of public spending. We were spending £700 billion back in 2010. What we will make sure is that over the medium term, the debt is falling. But we will do that not by cutting public spending, but by making sure we spend public money well. And the honourable gentleman talks about our spending, which he doesn't seem to support, on the energy price guarantee. But the reality is he can't criticise us on one hand for spending money, on the other hand claiming we're cutting public expenditure.
Keir Starmer.
If they can cheer, I hope they listen very, very carefully to that last answer, because other people will listen very, very carefully to it. Who voted? Who voted for this? Who voted for this? Who voted for this? Not homeowners paying an extra $500 extra on their mortgages. Who voted this? Not working people paying for tax cuts to the largest companies. Who voted for this? Not even most of the MPs behind her who know you can't pay for tax cuts on the never, never. Does she think the public will ever forgive the Conservative Party if they keep on defending this madness and go ahead with a kamikaze budget?
Mr. Speaker, what our budget has delivered is security for families for the next 2 winters. It's made sure that we're going to see higher economic growth, lower inflation and more opportunities. The way that we will get our country growing is through more jobs, more growth, more opportunities, not through higher taxes, higher spending and his friends in the union stopping hard-working people get to work.
Cheryl Berry. Come on, Cheryl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to see growth and jobs in East Cornwall, and I believe an investment zone could help this. Would the Prime Minister back the honourable member for North Cornwall and myself, who are supporting a zone for Liskeard and Bodmin area?
Well, I want to see more jobs, more opportunities, more homes for local people in Cornwall. And I know that's what my honourable friend is working towards with her colleagues, and I'm delighted we're bringing forward these investment zones that are going to give those opportunities to local people.
We now come to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister on the murder of David Amos a year ago, and thoughts and prayers very much with Julia and his family. And of course, we think very much of those in Crestland that have been caught up in the terrible tragedy there as well. I would have hoped that if the Prime Minister is making public spending commitments today, that she would have said that those that rely on social security benefits will get their benefits uprated in line with inflation. Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister last stood at the dispatch box, the average 2-year fixed-rate mortgage stood at 4.5%. They are now at 6.5% and rising, hitting average families with an extra £450 a month of mortgage payments every single month over and above what they were paying. 37 days into the job, this is literally the cost of the Prime Minister's incompetence. It is the price households are paying, and all because of the Chancellor that she chose. Will she now give up her desperate plan to save her Chancellor's skin by scapegoating the Governor of the Bank of England?
Mr. Speaker, the action we have taken has meant that families in Scotland and across the United Kingdom are not facing gargantuan energy bills. And what the honourable gentleman and his friends in Scotland could do to help us out is build the nuclear power stations that are going to help our energy security, help us get more gas out of the North Sea to help deliver on a more secure energy future for all of our people.
Ian Blackford.
Mr. Speaker, if she wants to ask us questions, we can swap places. But, you know, the reality is, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister is ignoring the damage of the chaos of the mini-budget. She is worrying about saving the Chancellor's job. But many families are now worried, not just about heating their homes, but keeping their homes, Prime Minister. The scale of this Tory crisis is frightening. 100,000 households a month are up for mortgage renewals. People can't afford to pay an extra £4,500 a year in interest, and plenty are already falling behind. Yep. The Prime Minister and her Chancellor have completely lost control. The only thing growing under this government are mortgages, rents and bills. Is that what she really meant when she declared herself a pro-growth Prime Minister?
Well, we have taken action on helping families heat their homes, and that's been very important, and I would love to see more support on delivering the energy security we need. Interest rates are rising globally. That is a fact. And interest rates are a decision for the Independent Bank of England. But I want to do all I can to help families across Britain. But the way we're going to help them is by delivering economic growth, by making sure we have the jobs and opportunities in Scotland and right across the UK. And what independent forecasters have shown is that following our intervention, economic growth is going to be higher than it would have been if we hadn't acted. And that is vitally important for the jobs, the opportunities and the livelihoods, and helping make sure people are able to put food on the table.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Way navigation winds through the heart of Guildford and is a much treasured part of our local environment. I welcome the announcement by the DEFRA Secretary last week that the Environment Agency will be able to increase fines on water companies for serious breaches of the rules to up to £250 million per breach. Will my right honourable friend confirm that no MP voted to discharge sewage into our waterways and that it is beneath the opposition parties and their activists to keep repeating this outright lie?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right about our support for cleaner water. And what we're doing about it, which the honourable lady has asked from a sedentary position, is we have increased, and my right honourable friend, the DEFRA Secretary, has increased the fines for water companies 100 times if they discharge sewage into waterworks in an illegal way. We've acted.
Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate my colleagues and I with the remarks made about the tragic events in Creesla in County Donegal, and our prayers continue to be with that devastated community. Does the Prime Minister agree with me in welcoming the renewed negotiations with the European Union about the Northern Ireland Protocol, that the outcome of those negotiations must reflect the objectives outlined by the Government in the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, and that this is the key to unlocking the door to political stability in Northern Ireland?
Well, I very much agree with the honourable gentleman. We need to deliver for the people of Northern Ireland. That means making sure that we have free-flowing trade, east-west as well as north-south. It means making sure that the people of Northern Ireland can benefit from the same tax benefits as people in Great Britain. And it means resolving the issues over governance and regulation. Now, I would prefer to achieve that through a negotiated solution with the EU. But if we're not able to do that, we can't allow the situation to drift. We have to proceed with the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill.
Mary Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Addressing health inequalities is a key part of levelling up, and so I welcome this week's news of £50 million to fund research into health disparities. We know poor health affects not only life expectancy, but also prosperity and more widely economic resilience and growth. Therefore, would my right honourable friend consider a future expansion of these research schemes to other parts of the North and the Greater Manchester region to encourage more healthcare research partnerships between our great universities and our local authorities?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right that this health research is vitally important. I know that my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, is looking at whether and where the scheme can be expanded, and we will be doing further commissioning rounds to look at that issue.
John McNally.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, you have had a holiday check, I think, in Birmingham where you're preaching to the choir, although the few MPs appear to be singing from a different song sheet. Prime Minister, your government is now outrageously flirting with disaster, financially and socially. As we've just heard, the increase in mortgage repayments will dwarf the rise in heating bills. How will you cope with the resultant increase in homelessness?
I'm responsible as you, but I'm sure the Prime Minister will take that on board.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what we have done as a government is we've acted decisively to deal with the very severe energy crisis we are facing. We are facing a severe energy crisis. We're also facing a slowdown in economic growth globally due to Putin's war in Ukraine, and not acting is not an option.
Gail Perman.
Prime Minister, the energy price guarantee is a key part of the growth plan, but too few businesses and households know about it, even if the Labour Party don't support it. Can I urge you to have a nationwide mail-out campaign to communicate what the government is doing to assess people on reduction of energy, and more particularly have a reduction of energy campaign by the public service so that we don't go down the route of spending too much on consumption, we reduce the supply.
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right, and I know the Energy Secretary is working on a plan to help companies and individuals use energy more efficiently. We're also working on this across government. I was delighted to speak to my friend yesterday, and I hope we'll be able to start this going in Number 10 straight away.
In Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During the lockdown, we clapped them, and then we laid wreaths for healthcare staff who had died on the front line. And how quickly our nurses have gone from the country's heroes to this government's villains, offered a derisory 72 pence a week pay rise, and then painted as militants for daring, having the audacity for balloting for industrial action for the first time in a century. Prime Minister, claps don't pay the bills, and neither does 72 pence pay rise. Nurses are leaving the NHS and the droves feeling abandoned by this government. Surely even the Prime Minister agrees that the government has its priorities wrong when unshackling the bonuses of the bankers and at the same time offering derisory pay rises to our treasured NHS staff.
Well, first of all, can I say what a brilliant job our fantastic nurses do across the country. And the figures he's quoting are simply wrong. The independent pay review body recommended a £1,400 rise on average, and that is what the government's committed to delivering.
Natalie Elphick.
Following the loss of 27 lives last winter in the Channel, the UK government offered joint patrols to the French on the beaches. Could my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, confirm that she renewed this offer to President Macron when they met, and further, that there'll be no new money, no fresh agreement with the French, unless they agree to joint beach patrols and a joint security crossing across the Channel to bring an end to the small boats crisis for good?
Well, the Home Secretary is committed to dealing with this very, very difficult issue of the small boats in the Channel. We do need to sort it out. We're committed to legislating, and we're also committed to getting an agreement with the French government. I did discuss it with President Macron last week, and the Home Secretary is following up.
Owen Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this Friday, Christine Graham, MSP, and I are hosting a community drop-in event on the cost of living crisis in Gorebridge. This will be a chance for local residents to come and meet with a range of partners to get advice and guidance on what they can do to help survive the current crisis. Could I extend an invite to the Prime Minister to come to this event on Friday so that my constituents could ask her directly what real-life experience means to address the cost rises that they are facing, and so that she can apologise to them for the disastrous decisions her government are making?
Well, I completely understand that families are struggling, and that is why this government acted within a week of coming into office to put in place the energy price guarantee so people aren't facing £6,000 bills. And that's why we've reversed the increase in national insurance. That's why we're cutting basic rate tax to make sure families are keeping more of their own money. And we're also making sure that the most vulnerable households get an extra £1,200 of support. I hope he is going to communicate that to his constituents.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I first thank the Prime Minister for her warm words on Sir David Amess, who is sorely missed in this place. Small and medium-sized enterprises are the lifeblood of our economy, and I warmly welcome the expansion of the small business threshold. Does my right honourable friend agree that only the Conservative Party is on the side of enterprise and their determination to unleash the full potential of our great country?
Well, we understand in the Conservative Party who pays our wages. And it's the people who get up every day and go to work. It's the businesses who set up. Those are the people driving our economy, and we will be unashamedly pro-growth, pro-business and pro-opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents were absolutely delighted that the fracking application in West Lancashire was withdrawn after a moratorium was declared. Since then, we've not seen any new scientific evidence that indicates fracking would now be safe. So, despite this, the government have decided to reverse that moratorium, committing to grant fracking licences only in areas that have local consent. So I would be grateful if the Prime Minister would reassure West Lancashire residents, my constituents, and please explain in detail how she will honour her statement that fracking licences, none of them will be forced on communities that don't want it.
Well, first of all, can I offer my best wishes to the Honourable Lady on her appointment as the chair of the Merseycare NHS Trust. I can absolutely assure her and colleagues around the House that fracking will only go ahead in areas where there is local community support.
Anthony Brown. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 weeks ago, a bomb in Afghanistan killed 35 girls and young women. They were Hazaras from the country's second-largest ethnic minority who are being massacred under the Taliban. Today, outside Parliament, Hazaras from across the UK, including from my constituency, are gathering, calling for international support to stop the slaughter. And we're joined here today by representatives of the Hazara Council of Great Britain. Will my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, support the Hazaras in trying to stop the killings and arrange for her ministers to meet their representatives?
Well, it is extremely concerning what is taking place in Afghanistan, and I'm afraid the reversal of women's rights and women's opportunities. And one of the things we have done is make sure we're restoring the aid budget for women and girls. And I'm sure my friend, the Right Honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, will be very happy to meet the group and discuss further.
Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government's botched budget gave unfunded tax cuts to some of the richest companies, whilst across the country there are hospitals who worry that their roofs might collapse at any moment. Hitchinbrook Hospital, Frimley Park Hospital and Queen Elizabeth Hospital in the Prime Minister's own local area. These are just three of a number of hospitals who need hundreds of millions of pounds, some of them urgently. So will the Prime Minister promise that every affected hospital will be given the money they need to fix these dangerous roofs in the next 12 months?
Well, I do want to correct the Honourable Lady, because what we are doing is simply not putting up corporation tax. It's not a tax cut. We're just not raising corporation tax. And I feel it would be wrong in a time when we are trying to attract investment into our country at a time of global economic slowdown to be raising taxes, because it will bring less revenue in. And the way that we are going to get the money to fund our National Health Service, the way that we're going to get money to fund our schools, is by having a strong economy with companies investing and creating jobs.
I fully support this government's growth agenda, Prime Minister. Would she agree with me that this can be achieved whilst also protecting and restoring our precious nature and ecosystems and working with our farmers so that we do meet our legally binding target to restore nature by 2030. I know she understands this. She has precious talk streams in her own constituency, and will she agree that if we get this right, there will be more jobs, skills, opportunities, because every nation in the world depends on its natural environment.
Well, my honourable friend did a fantastic job promoting the natural environment when she was at DEFRA. We are going to deliver economic growth in an environmentally friendly way. What this is about improving the processes and deliver better outcomes, both for the environment whilst making sure we have a growing economy as well. And those two things go hand in hand.
Mothers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister wants us to believe that fracking will reduce our energy bills, but it was not so long ago that her Chancellor said that those calling for fracking's return misunderstand the situation and that no amount of shale gas would be enough to lower the European price any time soon. So, Prime Minister, is the Chancellor wrong about that?
That's right, Justin.
We are pulling every lever to improve our energy supply in Britain, whether it's the North Sea and opening up more opportunity there, which the opposition front bench are against, whether it's fracking, whether it's more renewables, which I'm very supportive of, whether it's more solar panels in the right place, whether it's more nuclear power stations, which are opposed by the SNP. We are doing everything we can because we can never be in a situation again where we are dependent on authoritarian regimes for our energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the past week, serious safeguarding failures by the children's charity Mermaids have come to light. Revelations that the charity sent breast-flattening devices to young girls behind their parents' back, promoted harmful medical and surgical procedures to children, hired a trustee with links to paedophile organisations, and a digital engagement manager who posted pornographic images online, including of himself dressed as a schoolgirl. For years, despite whistleblowers raising alarm, Mermaids have had unfettered access to vulnerable children. Does my right honourable friend agree that it has taken far too long for these concerns to be taken seriously? And does she also agree that it is high time for a police investigation into the activities of Mermaids and its staff?
It's very important that under 18s are able to develop their own decision-making capabilities and not be forced into any kind of activity. And what I would say on the subject of the investigation she raises, of course those matters should be raised and should be properly looked at.
Sir Oldney.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. For my constituents in Richmond Park and for communities across South West London, from Wimbledon to Elmbridge, any expansion of Heathrow would be disastrous. A third runway would see over 6 million more tonnes of carbon pumped into the atmosphere every year and 2 million households affected by increased noise levels. Last week, the Transport Secretary said she supported Heathrow expansion. The Prime Minister has previously stated she would support a fourth runway. So, does the Prime Minister stand by her previous comments, or will she rule out government support for construction of a third runway at Heathrow?
Well, I absolutely agree with what the Transport Secretary said in her comments. And what we need to do is make sure that industries like the air industry become more environmentally friendly. You know, I support the development of low carbon technology in those sectors. That's the way we will help grow the economy but also serve the environment.
Virginia Crosby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm delighted to hear the Prime Minister be such a champion for nuclear. My question is, when will the mission and plan for Great British Nuclear be announced? The market needs the confidence to invest in new nuclear, like Wilbur in my constituency of Arnasmore, to help us achieve net zero for our energy security and to get thousands of high-quality jobs.
Well, I can tell my honourable friend that Great British Nuclear will be set up this year, and it will be bringing forward new nuclear projects. I'm delighted about her support for Wilfer and to make sure that we have nuclear power provided in Wales. I'd just like to see it right across the United Kingdom too.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I welcome her to her place. I'm not sure how you measure a good honeymoon, Mr. Speaker. But after 5 weeks of a crisis conceived in Downing Street of crashing pensions, interest rates rising, mortgage market turmoil and complete financial chaos, the country has been left wanting divorce. In 2 recent polls, 60% of this country want an immediate general election. The Prime Minister claims she's in listening mode. Will she give way to the public?
Mr. Speaker, I think the last thing we need is a general election.
That concludes Prime Minister's questions. Let the people leave. Who's the minute? Shh. He's in New York, don't worry. Right, let us come to the urgent question. I call Rachel Reeves, Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Chancellor of the Exchequer to make a statement on the current economic crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor of the Exchequer is in Washington having meetings with the IMF and is which have been routine meetings have been long scheduled.
Can I say, I know it's the first Wednesday back, we're all excitable, a little calm so I can hear the Minister. Come on, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Routine meetings that have been long scheduled and certainly not a cause for exuberance or overexcitement from the benches opposite. Mr. Speaker, as we know, the world has faced surging energy prices since Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine. We've seen high inflation, very high inflation, across the Western world. And we've seen a cycle of increasing interest rates across Western economies as well, across many Western economies. But let me reassure the House that the fundamentals of the United Kingdom's economy remain resilient. Unemployment at 3.5% is the lowest it's been in my lifetime. And for the record, I was born in 1976. Economic growth last year, the calendar year 2021, was the highest of any G7 country, 7.5%. And just yesterday, the IMF forecast that economic growth, GDP growth, this current year in the UK would be at 3.6%, once again, for the second consecutive year, the highest of any G7 country. So our economy is in resilient condition. But I know that many families are worried about the challenges we face, and that is why just a few weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, we introduced the energy price guarantee. Families were genuinely fearful that they might face energy bills this winter of £3,000, £4,000, £5,000, £6,000 or even £7,000 per year. But that energy price guarantee will ensure the average household sees energy prices no higher than £2,500 on average, not for 6 months, like the Labour plan, but for 2 years. And we also introduced a growth plan to get our economy growing, to see wages sustainably rising, to see good jobs created, and to create a sustainable tax base to fund our public services. This government has a growth plan. the opposition has no plan. But Mr. Speaker, we intend to do this in a way that is fiscally responsible, and that is why on the 31st of October, in less than 3 weeks' time, the Chancellor of the Exchequer will set out the medium-term fiscal plan, explaining to the House exactly how he will do that and how we will continue the UK's track record of having the highest growth in the G7, not just last year, but this year as well.
Rachel Reeves.
Mr. Speaker, people are facing insecurity, instability and deep anxiety, and they deserve answers. Conservative economic policy has caused mayhem with financial markets, have pushed up mortgage costs and put pension funds in peril, and it's wiped £300 billion of the UK stock and bond markets, all directly caused by the choices of this government. The mini-budget just 19 days ago was a bonfire made up of unfunded tax cuts, excessive borrowing and repeated undermining of economic institutions. It was built and then set ablaze by a Conservative Party totally out of control. Not disruptors, but pyromaniacs. And that fire has now spread. And yet government deny all responsibility. So will the Minister tell the House what guarantees will the government give that the currency slide will stop and that people's pensions are safe? How do they expect people to pay £500 more a month on average on their mortgages? How many more repossessions of family homes will there be if the government do not change course? How much more is the government borrowing on debt interest because of higher borrowing costs? While ministers desperately try to blame global conditions, why is it that no other central bank in the world has had to step in 3 times in less than 3 weeks to protect financial stability? The country now faces a very serious situation. Ahead of the ending of the Bank of England's emergency operations this Friday, what action will the government take to ensure that their budget doesn't have further consequences for financial stability or for people's pensions? Mr. Speaker, this is a Tory crisis made in Downing Street, but it is ordinary working people who are paying the price. And it can only be resolved when the Conservatives put aside their pride and reverse this catastrophic mini-budget, and they must do so now.
Well, the Shadow Chancellor calls for a reversal of the growth plan, yet at the first opportunity last night, they voted for it. She asked about mortgage rates. Let me point out to the Shadow Chancellor that mortgage rates around the world have been on an upward trajectory all year. And in fact, if we compare base rates in the United Kingdom to the United States, she will be aware that in both countries the base rate started this year at 0.25%. In the UK, the base rate is currently 2.25. In the US, it is 3.25, a full percentage point higher. She referenced borrowing costs. She should be aware, I'm sure she is aware, that 2-year government bond yields are about the same in the US as they are in the UK. The US bond yields have been going up in the course of this year as well. She referenced the currency. The dollar has shown strength against a basket of currencies throughout this calendar year. And if she looks at the dollar strengthening against the euro, it strengthened about 15% this calendar year. It strengthened about 15%. It strengthened about 15% against sterling. Very, very similar figures. She asked about the cost of living as well. We are very mindful of that. That is why, Mr. Speaker, we have introduced a £37 billion package to help people, disproportionately targeted at people on lower incomes, so the people on the 1/3 of lower incomes receive £1,200. That is why we've introduced, on I think the 2nd or 3rd day in office, the energy price guarantee, making sure people don't pay on average more than £2,500 instead of facing bills of £5,000 or £6,000, not for 6 months like the Labour Party offered, but for 2 years. That's why the national minimum wage last April was increased by a large amount. That's why the national insurance threshold was increased up to £12,500 in July. So people on lower incomes now pay virtually no national insurance or income tax. That's the package of measures that this government has introduced, because we stand on the side of working people and we've taken the steps needed to support them.
We come to the chair of the Select Committee, Mel Stride.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor, was quite right to have brought forward the date for the medium-term plan and the OBR forecast. He has, of course, a huge challenge now in landing those plans to reassure the markets. He has to get the fiscal rules right. He has to come forward with spending restraint and revenue raisers that are politically deliverable. Given the huge challenges, there are many, myself included, who believe that it is quite possible that he will simply have to come forward with a further rowing back on the tax announcements that he made on the 23rd of September. So could I ask my right honourable friend to confirm that that possibility is still on the table?
Well, I thank the Select Committee Chairman for his counsel, which I know the Chancellor always listens to very carefully. Of course, the Select Committee Chairman, I think, suggested publicly that the date for the medium-term fiscal plan should be brought forward, along with others, and the Chancellor listened to the Select Committee Chair and responded by bringing forward the date from November the 23rd to October the 31st. There are not any plans to reverse any of the tax measures announced in the growth plan. There is, I think, a measure of consensus. Indeed, the Labour Party voted just last night for the reduction in national insurance, because we want to make sure the UK is a competitive jurisdiction where companies and high potential individuals who are internationally mobile choose to come to the United Kingdom to locate and to grow. But we do, of course, as the Select Committee Chairman says, need to make sure we do this in a way that is fiscally responsible, to make sure that debt over GDP does fall in the medium term, and the strategy, the plan, will lay out exactly how that will be achieved to the House in detail, scored by the OBR on October the 31st.
West MP spokesperson, Alison Thulas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. He talks up the IMF, but not their criticism yesterday or the pathetic growth they've projected for next year of just 0.3%. It's funny that. The Treasury Select Committee took evidence this morning from a range of economists, all of whom echoed the concerns of the public about the chaos this shambolic UK Tory government has created. I'm not sure if he considers Deutsche Bank as part of his anti-growth coalition, but their chief economist, Sanjay Raja, this morning was very clear that the UK had particular characteristics that was making this crisis worse. He said, you've got a sidelined fiscal watchdog, you've got the lack of a medium-term fiscal plan, one of the largest unfunded tax cuts and package of measures since the early 1970s, and it's sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. This is chaos that he and his colleagues have deliberately created, and it's impacting people and businesses across these islands. So I ask him, will he bring more money to devolved institutions to help them tackle the chaos that he and his colleagues have created? Will he commit to uprating benefits by inflation and give some more support to those in the asylum system and those on no recourse to public funds? Will he bring certainty to businesses who don't know yet what will happen at the end of the 6-month reprieve, because those bills have not gone away? Mr. Speaker, Glasgow Centre for Population Health published some research that attributed around 330,000 excess deaths in 2010 to austerity. Tory austerity by him and his colleagues over the past 12 years. So will he cancel any further cuts, because they cost Scotland and our neighbours far more than we can ever afford? Scotland didn't want this, didn't vote for this, and can no longer trust in the financial stability of the UK, never mind this Tory government.
Can I just say, I have the greatest respect for the Honourable Lady, but I would say she knows the rules is 1 minute, not 1 minute 45 seconds or 2, so please, let's stick to the rules of the House. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the Scottish Government, of course, is receiving record levels of funding, and that will continue. She asked about excess deaths. Well, I think the drug death record of the nationalist government is frankly pretty terrible. She asked about the uprating to welfare. There is a statutory process that happens every year, every autumn, and that decision has not been taken. It'll happen in the normal way, as it has done for every year. She referenced the IMF's growth forecast for next year. I've already pointed out that last year we had the highest growth in the G7. This year we have the highest growth in the G7. And if you take the 3 years together, last year, this year, and next year, you will find that the UK, at 11.7% over those 3 years, still has, across the 3 years, the highest growth of any G7 country. The Chancellor, she asked about institutions. The Chancellor and the Prime Minister have the highest regard for the OBR and the Bank of England. They're meeting regularly with both of those institutions. She referenced the growth plan, having a competitive tax system, supply-side reforms to unleash the productive potential of our economy, and making our energy market function properly once again are essential prerequisites for growth, and I'm proud it's this government that are promoting them.
Dame Andrew Leadsom.
Mr. Speaker, I'm disappointed at the Shadow Chancellor, who is a very good economist, who is accusing the government of causing problems for people's mortgage rates. But my honourable friend, I'm sure, will agree with me that one of the worst things that can hit any economy is a wage price spiral as a result of huge inflation. And so can my honourable friend confirm to this House that the action the government has taken to provide support to the economy, to provide this huge input to energy prices, will bring down headline inflation and specifically make mortgage rates better than they would have been otherwise? Totally the opposite to what the Shadow Chancellor is saying.
Well, my right honourable friend, who of course has a very distinguished professional track record in financial services, is absolutely right. A range of independent forecasters have confirmed that the energy price guarantee will not only protect our constituents from high prices, it will also lower inflation by about 5% compared to where it would otherwise have been. A vital intervention. And while we're on the subject of inflation, it is worth keeping in mind that inflation in continental Europe, in many countries, is considerably higher than it is in the United Kingdom. For example, in Germany, it is 10.9%, and in Holland, it's 14%.
Dave McGillier.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister has made great play of supporting people with their energy bills, but businesses only get support until March. And the government also puts great play on creating growth. Many of the businesses in my constituency, particularly hospitality businesses, with only a guarantee on their energy bills till March, are making decisions in the coming weeks about whether they will be able to stay open and continue to be employers. How does that help growth? And will he give them some guarantee from March onwards?
Well, the Honourable Lady raises questions about timeframes. Of course, the Labour proposal was only for 6 months for consumers and businesses, and I didn't hear her criticising that. The consumer offer is for 24 months, for 2 years. In relation to businesses, she is quite right. The Honourable Lady is quite right. The business scheme is for 6 months, but the government made a commitment back in September that within 3 months of September, so within 2 months of now, further plans will be brought forward to explain to businesses and charities and indeed the public sector how they will be handled after March of next year. And my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, will announce that to the House in the coming weeks.
Andrew Sandhu.
Growing our tax revenues in a way that is sustainable in every sense of that word is clearly massively important to pay for all the things we deeply care about. But will my right honourable friend reassure us that he does get the significance of government borrowing costs and that he will make sure that His Majesty's government does nothing that pushes those up unnecessarily high compared with the United States and Germany?
Yes, my honourable friend is making a very important and very reasonable point. And I've said already, he mentions comparisons with other countries. Of course, our 2-year bond yield is about the same as the United States at the moment. But we are mindful of the need to ensure reasonable borrowing costs, which of course means financial responsibility. Our debt to GDP ratio today is the second lowest in the G7. And my honourable friend, the Chancellor, will be setting out in under 3 weeks' time, on October the 31st, precisely how he will be delivering fiscal stability and fiscal responsibility in the years ahead. And I'm sure my honourable friend, when he hears that statement, will be reassured and comforted by it.
Emma Hardy.
Mr. Speaker, earlier today we were given evidence on the Treasury Select Committee which was incredibly sobering. All 5 of the economic specialists agreed that the UK's budget had contributed.
But just come back and listen to another question. You shouldn't just dash out. Please, Emma Hardy, sorry.
2 questions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I was saying, earlier today we had evidence on the Treasury Select Committee where all 5 economists agreed that the UK's budget has contributed to the current economic turmoil. So with the Prime Minister earlier stating there was going to be no budget cuts, and further to the point from my friend, the Chair of the Treasury Select Committee, does the Minister agree with Mohammed El-Iran, the Chief Economic Advisor at Alliance, who said yesterday, "I see no alternative but the government saying we will not cut taxes now"?
Well, I can thank the honourable lady for her question. I've already set out how there have been global trends over the last 6 or 9 months in terms of higher energy prices, higher inflation, and a cycle of increasing interest rates around the globe. And in particular, I set out how the monetary tightening in the United States at 300 basis points over the last 9 months or 10 months is 1.5 times higher than the fiscal tightening in the United Kingdom, which has been over the same period 200 basis points. In relation to her questions about balancing the books over the medium term, I mean, the fiscal plan, the medium-term fiscal plan will set that out. We do intend to control public spending, for example, to stick within, well, let's listen to the answer, to stick within the SR21 spending limits. But I would point out to the House that those SR21 spending limits do see real terms increases over the 3 years, but we are going to be sticking with iron discipline to those spending limits and not increasing them, and we'll also show spending restraint in the years ahead. But showing spending restraint is different to real terms cuts.
James Cartledge.
It's very welcome that a few minutes ago the Chief Secretary said that the effect of the statement on 31st of October would be to show that the Chancellor was 100% committed to fiscal responsibility. That is very welcome to colleagues on all sides, I think. That means that all the previous unfunded tax cuts will now be funded in that statement.
What the statement will set out in the round is how we will get debt as a proportion of GDP falling in the medium term. That is the critical metric, and that is what the medium-term fiscal plan will deliver.
Dame Angela Riedel.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I just offer the Chief Secretary to the Treasury some gentle advice? If he refuses to accept that the fiscal event on the 23rd has had any effect on what's happened in the markets since, then that will not be reassuring for the markets. He needs to stop being in denial and admit that serious mistakes were made. Now, the Prime Minister said in Prime Minister's questions there would be no public spending cuts, and yet we know, as a result of the fiscal event and the unfunded tax cuts, that there's a £60 billion gap between the expenditure and the money coming in. So no public spending cuts. That only leaves the reversal of the tax cuts to balance the books, doesn't it?
Well, look, I've already explained in response to a previous question that spending restraint is not the same as real terms cuts. We do not plan real term cuts, but we do plan iron discipline when it comes to spending restraint. But the answers to her questions will be set out in full at the fiscal statement, which will be accompanied by a full OBR scoring and a set of OBR forecasts, when all of these questions will get very clearly answered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The intervention of the Bank of England into both the gilt market and the corporate bond market has alarmed many over the recent days. I'd be interested in the Chief Secretary's view as to what is the Treasury's assessment of the cost to the Treasury and the fiscal position to the Bank of England's interventions in those markets.
Well, I thank my honourable friend, the member for Hitchin and Harpenden, for his question. It obviously depends on the prices at which the Bank of England buy and sell bonds or gilts in the market. It's worth observing that so far they've purchased considerably less by value of gilts than the limits that were set out originally. So the volume of gilts that they've got on their balance sheet now is much less than the limits. But to answer his question about fiscal cost, that if there is any fiscal cost, that will depend entirely on market prices.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 days before the budget, a young constituent of mine had hoped to buy her home through shared ownership. She was offered a mortgage at 4.28 interest by the Halifax. A day after the statement, the offer was withdrawn and it has rocketed for a 2-year fixed-rate deal to 6.9%. That's £150 a month more overnight because of the government's unfunded giveaways to people on over 150 grand per year. What would be his advice to my constituent? Should she take the deal, or would he agree with this morning's panel of experts at the Treasury Select Committee that she should not go near it because house prices are about to plummet?
Well, I mean, I'm obviously not going to offer individual financial advice to constituents. What I would say is there are around about 2,300 mortgage products currently on the market. I would say we are very keen as a government to help first-time buyers, particularly younger first-time buyers in their 20s and 30s, which is why stamp duty is being cut for cheaper purchases, and in particular the threshold for stamp duty for first-time buyers is being raised, I think from memory, to £425,000, which particularly helps when it comes to putting together a deposit, because of course deposits can't be mortgage funded. In addition to that, we want to help people with the broader cost of living pressures, which obviously makes it easier to find money to fund mortgages. That's what the energy price guarantee is designed to do. It's what lower tax rates in general are designed to do, including the tax rates that the tax reductions rather that the Labour Party voted for yesterday. It's what the cost of living package is designed to do, the £37 billion. So by helping with the cost of living in general, we are obviously making mortgage costs a little bit easier to meet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The IMF yesterday underlined the UK's economy's position as being the fastest growing in the G7. And in spite of the noises off, they further stated that the recent fiscal changes will add further to growth projections. That's in addition to the record low unemployment data that has been highlighted this week. But does my right honourable friend agree that further changes need to be made in terms of supply-side reforms, which will continue the momentum in the growing economy so that will result in real jobs in my constituency and right across the country?
Well, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for mentioning again the international comparisons. The unemployment figure in the UK, 3.5%, which members opposite have inexplicably not been asking about, the lowest in my lifetime, compares very favourably to France, where it's more than double, 7.3%, or Italy, where it's 7.8%. Even in Canada, it is 5.2%. So our unemployment figures compare very favourably internationally. And when it comes to the growth figures my friend asked about, the UK once again over the last 3 years taken together, 11.7% over those 3 years, heads the G7, considerably, 4 times higher nearly than Germany at 3.9, over double Japan at 5.1, and higher than France, Italy, Canada and the USA. But he asked about supply-side reforms to help his constituents, and my honourable friend will be hearing a lot more about those supply-side reforms in the coming weeks, both from Secretaries of State directly and from the Chancellor at the medium-term fiscal plan, to explain how we're going to get regulatory burdens off the back of businesses to help them grow and create the jobs for his constituents that he quite rightly wants to see.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The mini-budget fiasco has caused a material risk to UK's financial stability, and the Bank of England has said that $1 trillion could have been erased from the UK pension fund investments if it hadn't stepped in following the mini-budget turmoil. So the Minister needs to heed the advice of the Chairman of the Treasury Committee and others across the House and junk the tax cuts in this budget. They're unfunded and they're creating chaos in the markets. We need to restore confidence so that our constituents don't suffer. The Minister needs to stop being arrogant and take heed, listen to the expertise and take action.
If the Honourable Lady objects so much to tax reductions, why did she vote for them yesterday?
Absolutely. Henry Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday I spoke with business leaders in my Crawley constituency and they welcomed both the near record low unemployment levels and the International Monetary Fund outlook of 3.6% growth. Does the Chief Secretary to the Treasury agree with me that that is a direct consequence of the policies that this government is enacting?
Yes, I do. The leading growth in the G7 and the lowest unemployment figures in my lifetime are testament to the sagacity of this government's economic policies.
Sarah Olney.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Today is another day when the government's mismanagement of the economy is causing market turmoil, putting thousands of pensioners and mortgage holders at risk. The Governor of the Bank of England yesterday told pension funds to sort it out after announcing that the bank's emergency bond buying scheme will close in 2 days. The government has 48 hours to save pension funds. Will the government call the Chancellor back from Washington, hold an emergency cabinet meeting and deal with the pension crisis?
The Chancellor is in extremely regular contact with the Governor of the Bank of England. Obviously, the bank and its various agencies have responsibility for systemic financial stability. We're working closely with them and we have complete confidence in the bank's management of this process.
Robert Walton.
Speaker, the Conservative Party stands for low taxes but also for fiscal responsibility and sound money. Given that the Prime Minister has just said that there will not be public sector spending cuts, can I ask the Chief Secretary to the Treasury if the government are considering deferring any of the tax measures recently announced by the Chancellor?
We don't plan to defer the tax measures because we think having an internationally competitive tax system is important because it will help encourage businesses and successful individuals to locate here in the United Kingdom rather than anywhere else. I used to be Technology Minister and tech businesses can choose whether they locate here or New York or San Francisco or Singapore or South Korea or anywhere else in the world. We want them to choose the United Kingdom and that is why competitive tax rates and the right regulatory environment is so important.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Britain has embraced globalisation arguably more than other nations around the world over the last couple of decades. About half of our GDP is subject to international headwinds. But the world is getting more dangerous, not less. He mentioned Ukraine. Could I suggest that any future fiscal statement is run by the National Security Council for comment and perhaps recommendations which might include organising a United Nations safe haven around the port of Odessa so those grain ships can get out, helping reduce the price of food, reducing inflation in this country?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his suggestion around Odessa. I know he's a sort of expert in military matters and matters of international diplomacy, and of course he's, I think, been to Ukraine in the past 12 months. I'll certainly pass his suggestion on to my colleagues.
Sure.
I don't think ministers appreciate the gravity or the urgency of this situation, Mr. Speaker. We have a Prime Minister committing to no spending cuts a few minutes ago. We have a government still committed to tens of billions of pounds of unfunded tax cuts, and the Bank of England withdrawing its special support on Friday. What is the government doing to avoid a market crash this Friday?
Well, I mean, the reason that on the second day of the new government's term in office we